It's been an honor to have you in our presence yesterday at Wofford College and USC Upstate. But my father talked about the Harlem Hellfighters because he was in the 82nd Airborne, a sergeant. And he always talked about the Harlem Hellfighters, but I thought it was a game. Because he was always talking about Harlem this and Harlem that, so I never paid him any attention until Linda Conley and Jason, when they were at the Herald Journal, began to tell me the story about this regiment that came into Spartanburg. And so having Noble here with us, as Tony stated, this is truly a moment that you're going to remember in the future, that we had history right here with us, because when he talked about the big bands and Lena Horne, Cab Calloway, you think of all these people. Spartanburg had a big piece in that, of launching all of this because of what took place in here in Spartanburg that we're going to talk about tonight. We talked about the big band yesterday, but tonight we're going to talk about Spartanburg. And to set the tone for this, this is 1917. And in 1917, you know, slavery ended in 1865. So they say. Yeah, because we do know that Mississippi didn't ratify until 2013. They didn't ratify the 13th Amendment. So if you look at the history of, and when you look at Camp Wadsworth, it was in April 6, 1917, when the U.S. declared war. A group of Spartanburg businessmen got together, led by Mr. Cleveland, John B. Cleveland, pulled together, which we all know about how they always pull together their groups. He pulled together a group to try to get the camp to Spartanburg. So they pulled the group together, which he chaired, and they pulled together about $200,000 to get the camp to Spartanburg. So this happened in April, but in June, Spartanburg was awarded the camp here in Spartanburg. The only thing about that, during that time, there were so many black soldiers that were persecuted, hung, you name it, during that time in the South. Now, we're gonna have you to tell us about how they got here, the experience, just in your way to share with us what took place. But I was always curious to the fact that the War Department didn't want any more of this violence to take place. But they sent folks here to South Carolina, where we were number one in just about everything in terms of slavery. You know, we were the Ellis Island for Africans in Charleston. You know, we were the first to succeed because Abraham Lincoln, you know, the slave economy was a big thing here in South Carolina. So if you look at everything during that time that took place, staying in your place, the slaves, and having a group of black men from New York to come here in that atmosphere, that's what we're talking about when you look at the 369 coming into Spartanburg. So if you could, in your way, tell us what your father told you and what you've learned about the trip to Spartanburg, that you're going to get into a little bit later too, to tell us about the 14-day rule.
The new rule.
The new rule. That's our new rule. But if you could tell us the arrival right down the street from here, the train station coming into Spartanburg during that time, tell us.
Let me take you back maybe 4 months, 5 months before they arrived on October the 10th. It was the second day of September, the day I always remember. Go ahead, you know the rest. Oh no, my daddy did not die. Okay. All right, just a little temptation thing. Yeah. Okay, so my dad had moved to New York and joined the great Jim Europe's organization. Jim Europe was the toast of New York City, white or black. He made music for all of the society leaders. Irene and her husband and Castle, they invented two-step, foxtrot, and they needed music. Jim Europe's orchestra provided their music. So my dad invited himself to New York, hoping a letter of introduction would get him into Jim Europe's organization. But when he told Jim, who wrote the letter, Jim said, you don't have to audition. If she says you're good, you're good. Let's go have a drink. And that was the beginning of their relationship. So as time moves on, there's a debate going on. Should African Americans be involved in this war to free the rest of the world, considering what we're going through now? So that was a big debate on the level of, W.B. Du Bois and everyone else. But Jim Europe thought if we, his people in New York, answered the call, that when we come back, we'll have a little bit more respect. Because Jim had big ideas of music on Broadway. He already had the basis of a symphony. And this new thing of recording was happening out on the West Coast. Maybe we should get into that. So someone said he would have been Berry Gordy's Motown in 1917 if his dream was fulfilled. He had all the connections and money behind him. So he went and signed up, but he said, I want to fight. So he asked to be in the machine gun company of the regiment, which had just been formed. They needed 2,500 men to actually be certified as a regiment. They only had like 150 people. But Jim signed up, took a test, and became a lieutenant, just like that. The rest of us had to go through years getting stripes. Jim becomes second lieutenant. And then he goes back to the office, tells my dad what he just did. My dad said, why are you doing that? We got rehearsal next week. He said, no, and you're going down there too. He said, well, why me? I mean, I don't even know where Germany is, much less France. I have no problem. He said, no, you need to go there. Told him the story. So my dad went and signed up. And as Jim is now talking to some of the future leaders of the regiment, the white colonels and captains, they said, Jim, you're the best musician in New York City. Every regiment has a band, and you should have the best band in the whole U.S. Army. I need you to put together the band. So Jim said, well, the band leader is a sergeant. I'm already a second lieutenant. I'm not going down to be the sergeant, but I'll help you put the band together. But to do it, I just can't have 48 trumpets playing like in most of the marching bands. I need some wood instruments. And the best players that I know of are in Puerto Rico. He said, oh really? You're going to go to Puerto Rico and ask some people to come to America, join the band, and and fight? He said, yes, they're good musicians down there, they'll do it. Said, okay, what does it take, Jim? So I really don't want to do this, so $10,000. This is 1917. Within 3 weeks, here's your $10,000, go get them. So Jim went down to Puerto Rico, ended up with 19 of the best musicians down there, spoke no English, but they're coming to New York with those 5-story buildings, So they came, he put together a great sounding band. Now it's time to build up the troop. They needed 2,500. They didn't know where they were going to train, but they needed 2,500. So they would put the band on top of a long bus, drive the bus through Harlem, playing the Memphis Blues, and people would just get on board. And they filled the bus and went straight to the signing and induction center and said, Uncle Sam needs you right now. It worked, because within a few months they had the 2,500. Now, where do you go? They had no armory. They only sort of marched around with broomsticks on the side streets of Harlem, waiting to get trained. And the word came out, we're going to go to South Carolina. Well, there was a Hamilton Fish, who was a very prominent man in politics later. He was already a captain. He wrote the Secretary of the Navy, which happened to be Franklin D. Roosevelt, and said, why are you sending us to, what happened in East St. Louis, Houston? They're shooting people are being executed for no, without due process. Why? Said, I don't know, beat the hell out of me, but that's where you're going. So they got on the train, the 2,500 men and the band, came to Spartanburg. As soon as they got off the train, they said, no, we should not be here. Because what was waiting for them when the word came, the train will be at 2 o'clock, the folks went down there and started booing, hissing, and from that day on, they knew they shouldn't be there. But the Army sent them there. So for 14 days, where the rule comes in, within 14 days, 2 weeks of the 16 weeks training, they accomplished very little. Because whenever the soldier got a chance to go downtown, it wasn't pretty. So they were told, please don't go down to town. Now the white 12th Regiment from New York knew some of these guys because they all lived in the San Juan Hill part of New York City. They were common musicians. So they would say, come on, I'll take you down. I said, no, no, you go down, brings me something back. Said, because we said we will not go down there and retaliate. So every maybe weekend, doing all the time, and thousands of troops were there, they would go downtown to the city square to give a free concert. Then somebody said, well, wait a minute, we have a hell of a band called the 15th Regiment from New York, and they don't play Sousa stuff, they play W.C. Handy stuff. I said, well, I don't know if they should go, but after the folks from town said, we want you here, the African-American community said, we want them boys playing. So they went down there. I have my notes. I'm not going to read them because I've memorized them. Because they were well received. There were thousands of troops and citizens at the square. And they were well received. So they said, okay, it's a little bit better, but it didn't stop anything. Fast forward to a couple of days later on a Sunday. My dad was raised by his father, who was a minister, and his mother, who played organ in the church. He knew every gospel song, and he had that tenor voice that makes you cry. So some of the people in town said, well, can you at least bring that kind of music to our church? So on a Sunday, two sergeants who also sang behind my dad, and Jim Europe, who played the piano, they did a concert at the church, which ended about 9 p.m. So now they come back out to the area to catch the rides to camp, because there was always something going back and forth. But there were already troops downtown. They had till like 11 o'clock before they had to be back. As they're standing there, Jim says, you know, I wonder what's happening in New York City. And the only way you know is you read a paper from New York. So there was a gentleman there, a local citizen, says, oh, yeah, they sell the New York papers at a hotel around the corner, a newsstand. So Jim said, well, I don't think we should do this. I said, no, it's all right. We go there and buy the papers. In fact, some of your troops were there just the other day. I said, are you sure? My dad said in his notes, this was written like 2 years after. I said, Jim, I don't think we should do that. So the gentleman said, I'll go get it. And Jim said, no, Sissle's gonna go. I'm a lieutenant, he's a sergeant, he's gonna go. So my dad reluctantly went to the Franklin Hotel, where the newsstand was, right inside the door. So you don't have to go do anything, just stand in line. There were a number of white and black soldiers milling around the area waiting to go back to camp. Some of them were from New York, and they all waved, hey, nobody, how you doing? They all kind of knew each other. So my dad goes in, and he's in a short line to buy the paper. The proprietor of the hotel, he wasn't bellman, worker, the proprietor of the hotel came up to him and said the N-word, take off your hat. No N-word person ever comes in with a hat on, and then knocked it off his head. So my dad, being a preacher kid, said, I stepped back and said, he looked at a gentleman, a white gentleman, officer, sitting there reading the paper, said nothing, with his hat on. So my dad said, well, sir, this is Uncle Sam's hat, trying to be funny. He said, I don't care whose hat it is, you're not wearing that hat in here. Now, get your hat and get out of here. So my dad reluctantly picked up his hat, but as he bent over, he was kicked 3 times out the door, falling on the ground. One of the white soldiers from New York saw this and just shook his head, and so my dad said, let me get out of here and defuse the situation. He goes back around the corner where Jim is, waiting to go back to camp. He said, but the 2 sergeants, I know they were hot-headed, so I wasn't going to tell anybody anything until I got back to camp. But as they were waiting, they saw all these soldiers running towards the area. My dad says, oh my God, that's where I came from. I wonder if this is related. He told Jim, I think there's going to be a problem that I may have caused. So they rushed around the corner, and the soldiers were white and black, were just making all kinds of gestures through the window and everything. So Jim, being the officer, kind of walked through the crowd, took my dad, and my dad said, I got to go back in there. The man already kicked me 3 times. Said, no, come on back in. He went back in with Jim. Jim is all of like 6'4", very imposing guy, and he had that voice. And he looked at the proprietor and he said, excuse me, sir, did this, before he could finish, he said, take off your hat too. Now, my dad says, I didn't know what Jim was going to do because we saw how he conducts the band. He can be imposing. But Jim took a deep breath, removed his hat, and said, sir, I just want to know, did this gentleman, my dad, do anything wrong here? No, he just didn't take his hat off. And I don't let the N-word, anybody come in here with a hat on. He said, well, we didn't know that. I just want to make sure he didn't do anything. Now I'm going to put my hat back on as I walk out the door. But that crowd, they're not hearing this. They just see hands moving. They don't know what's being said. So Jim goes back out. The MPs come. The brothers and the white officers, they want to go back in and finish this, whatever happened in there. And Jim was able to call rank on everybody until a white captain showed up, briefed him. He called them together. The MPs came, took them all back in there to make sure no rules were broken by the Army, and diffused. Went back to camp, and within 3 days they were on a train heading back to New York. Untrained, not ready to fight, not ready to do anything, because they never achieved anything as a way of preparing to fight. And that's what they were down there, how to fight a war. And that story followed them until they finally, the short of it is that, well, what to do with them? Well, let's just put them on a boat in December and send them to France. We don't know what they're doing. They're not trained, but the other black regiments aren't ready to create this black division. But let's just put them over there until the other regiments get there. So as they sailed the stormy seas of Atlantic, the boat was so rickety, it took 3 attempts to get out of the New York harbor. It broke down, it got hit by a barge. They said, was it a torpedo? You know, they don't know what's going on, but this boat finally made it. Looked up and found a convoy, crossed the Atlantic, landed on New Year's Day in 1918. But the plan was take whatever rifles they thought they had and give them shovels, because we have tons of arms coming in and we need somebody to unload those ships. We got 2,500 laborers right here. They're not trained to do anything, so we're going to train them how to unload a ship. But what happened was, the routine is whenever an American, there's only like 50,000, 150,000 troops already in. And Pershing said, we're not going to fight until we have 1 million men over here. So we're not really ready, all right? So the French band, regional band, would come and play the American national anthem. Then the arriving boat band plays the French, Marseillaise, right? Well, Jim Muir arranged it ragtime style. And the French were clapping their hands, but they didn't realize it was their national anthem until they hit a note and said, oh my God, they got to start saluting. And the effect was the generals, the French generals standing around looking at these people haven't smiled in 3 years and they're losing the war. And that music, whatever it is, can we take that band right now, put them on a train or whatever and send them to the back camps, to the hospitals, because that music is doing something to our people. So the history is, that's how jazz got to, France. Because they were there first. The other 27 black regiments that came, they had the same musicians from Chicago and wherever else, but the 369th was there first. They left here as the 15th National Guard, colored, but they called themselves the Harlem Rattlers. The French called them the Men of Bronze. The Germans called them Hellfighters, because they would not stop. They smile when they're shooting at you. And they won't let you take a prisoner. And they never lost an inch nor a man to prison because of the way they fought viciously. Because their rule was, let's go, goddamn, let's go. That's my story.
And so, would you say if it were not for Spartanburg, they would not have gotten kicked?
I would not be here, I think. I share this with my sister all the time. I said, so what if they finished training, they went over there and fought, but see what made it so unique was when they got over there, the American Army didn't want them. They waited for a black division. And there's like 7 or 8 regiments in a division, and there's only one here, and they're not even trained. So the French argued, well, you know, we're waiting for your 1,000,000 men to join the fight here, but can we borrow those 2,500 over there, because we're kind of losing this fight. We'll train them. Back and forth, back and forth. So the American general said, Pershing, okay, but they have to take off their American hats, give up their Springfield trusty rifles, don't look American, don't have any of this American stuff on, and they'll be like your black, French, whatever you call them. You can have them. So the French, now this is trench warfare, and Harlem people, they didn't have trenches, so they didn't know what to do. So for about 2 months, they trained them how to fight out of a trench, move to the next trench, retreat, go forward, whatever you do in a trench warfare. And finally, by April, they put on a sector. And so you have these trench lines going for hundreds of miles. So they gave them a sector, say, don't let any Germans come through here. But they just sat there waiting for the Germans. And, you know, they said, you're putting us in a sector with nothing going on here. And there's a trench up there that's empty. Can't we, like, move forward? They, no, because we've got a straight line. If you move, then you're to our flank. And so they argued and argued. So finally they put them on a sector where there was some fighting. And from that moment on, in April, they fought all the way through armistice, 191 straight days, longer than any American regiment fought. They were so victorious in what they did, the French gave them the whole regiment, the Croix de Guerre, which is their Medal of Honor. They gave all 2,000 men the Croix de Guerre, but they had the highest casualty rate because of the viciousness of where they were. They got replacements and they kept going. To honor them, the French let them enter Germany first when the war was over. They said, you guys are it. So they came back, well, they came back to the dock to go back to America in February. The war was over in November. The word had already been told by higher-ups. When these black soldiers, all of them, get back to America, we want you all to know they're not going to enjoy America not like we're going to let them, like they've enjoyed themselves here, because the French were just so gracious and honorable, and the women, and, you know, that's not going to happen in America. So take their weapons. Yeah, they can have a parade, but they're going to be with wooden, no trigger housing. You know, it's going to be looking good, but we do not want them to go back to thinking it's France. It's not. And a lot of these people who joined the 369th were not from New York. Because if you were black and wanted to join a regiment, you had to go to Detroit, Houston, or New York. So now you got to go back home to Jackson, Mississippi with your uniform on. And the stories are just ferocious of how they were treated, just going back, looking like soldiers. And so when they got back, they had the parade. Jim Europe knew the importance of following up on all this notoriety because everybody heard of the Harlem Hellfighters, mostly on the East Coast. So let's do a tour. Everybody was out of the Army, but let's get some uniforms, create a band called the Harlem Hellfighters on tour. And for 10 weeks, they toured. They got as far west as Cleveland. They went back to Boston for the second time. The last performance of this 10-week was in Boston. They were asked to lay a wreath on the 54th Regiment Memorial. That's the regiment with the Denzel Washington movie where they were in the Revolutionary War and fought here in South Carolina, I believe it was. Right? Okay, they got all killed, right?
Denzel Washington.
Yeah, right. Okay, so Denzel. So they want to honor the 54th Regiment by the Harlem Hellfighters the next day. So Jim had his orchestra of about 45 men, and they played through the first half of the audience, the first half of the program. Then they went backstage. My dad, a couple of singers, and Jim went to the, quote, green room. A door opened, and one of the drummers, he had 2 drummers, their names were Wright, but they weren't related. But they were snare drummers. They did a show together called the Snare Drum Twins. One of them broke in the door, and he was upset because he said, because Jim could look at you and tell you if you missed a note or missed a lick. He just give you that look. So this guy thought Jim was picking on him, but it was the other Wright that was messing up, not me, and you're always picking on me. So they cooled him down. My dad walked him out and said, let's get the show over with. The tour is over. We're going back home, and now we're going back to our lives. He walked him out, came back in and said, I think he'll be okay. As Jim was sitting down, the door came back open, and here comes Mr. Wright. He's all of about 5'5", with a short penknife, and said, I'm going to kill you. So Jim stood up. He said, Herb, just calm down. He said, no. And he lunged toward him. Jim picked up a chair like a lion tamer would do to hold him off. I asked my dad, what were you guys doing? He said, we were backing up because this guy had a knife going all this way, but we knew Jim could handle it. But then Jim said, Herb, everything's going to be all right, and put the chair down. And the guy took a swipe, hit him in the neck, and Jim saying, it's okay, but blood is gushing. So at the time they were able to get some hospital ambulance there, Jim told my dad, look, finish the concert. Don't forget to go down to the memorial tomorrow. I'll see you. So the concert ended. My dad and 2 others went to the hospital to see how Jim was doing, and they said he died. So the end of Jim Europe and all that was to happen with the Harlem Hellfighters and all the rest ended right there. Ended right there. Now they were able, when Jim got back to New York, he had one of the largest parades ever in the city for anybody. My dad was stuck in Boston trying to get the musicians, the music, and all that stuff back to New York City. So he missed that. But he went to the great funeral at the church. So all the members of the band stood in the aisle. And my dad writes, I was standing there. Nobody knew all the plans Jim and I have talked about over the years. And a lady looked at him and said, Mr. Sissle, you okay? Are you going to faint? He said, no, I'm just like a ship with no bearing. I'm just out here, because his whole world ended at that point. But the moral of the story is, Jim died and left my dad with a legacy of connections. So UB Blake was my dad's partner for a minute or two, but UB was not, he put his age up so he wouldn't go to war, because he had 2 parents who were former slaves, and he wanted to stay in America to take care of them. So UB stayed behind while Dad and Jim went off. So when it was over with the 369, UB Blake and Noble Sissle formed up Sissle and Blake, writing music, and that was in 1919. In 1921 in May, the Sissle and Blake music with 2 writers opened up a play called Shuffle Along in 1921, which changed the history of everything because it became a hit. The music, and they don't remember the story, but they remember that music. And when that young lady at the end of the play kissed the hero, everybody stood back. This had never been seen. 2 black people kissing on a stage, but they got an applause because the hero got his girl. So everybody in the audience, mostly white, clapped their hands, and they had a hit. Within 6 months, there were 5 other plays on Broadway because the people with the money wanted to hear this kind of music and see the kind of dancing that was going. It was all jazz dancing. You know what that was. Langston Hughes came to New York to go to Columbia because he heard about this play up there. He was all into theater and everything. Langston Hughes saw the play about 5 times according to his book. And he says later, that's where the Harlem Renaissance began, with that show right there. Because from that moment on, if you had any kind of talent, you came to New York, people will buy your art, pay for you to sing, and that was it until the crash of 29 and all that went away. But for those 10 years, Sissle and Blake moved on to higher things, and it was all because of what Jim Muir and Spartanburg did.
But listening to that and listening yesterday to you, the talent that they had and the will to fight for a country that thought of them as less than, as you stated yesterday, how what they received. But I mean, to have that in them, to just lay it down, and they had plans for the future, but it's like, no, we're going to go and fight. Can you tell me, in this crowd here, I mean, just a little bit more about your father, because he was so giving, and even when the Gold Star mothers came over to visit the graves, how he was there to greet them, and he was always there to greet others, to help others, to be on the front line, lay his talent down to fight for a country. I mean, it's just, and then to see that these are musicians who didn't get trained, who went over and fought in a war where at that time it's like, no, if you're black, you cannot fight. You can put coal in the engine, you can dig, prepare the roads, build the roads and so on, but they went over, and that was one of the things that Sergeant Henry Johnson, when his daughter came here to unveil the marker, she was talking about her father who, like, he didn't have the training, but he was able to rescue and kill 18 German soldiers. And Andre Ricardo from the French military came here and brought the letter talking about how these men were so, as far as with the tenacity, and they gave them the name the Harlem Hellfires. But to hear that they didn't have any training and they were musicians, and people said, no, you can't fight. We don't want you fighting in a war with us. I mean, it is just, it's mind-boggling.
Well, the French who trained them, the military folks said, I know these people just came from home, and I guess they went somewhere south, was it? But these guys want to learn, and they want to be here, because they were volunteers, most of them. So when they came back, the fighting men had to go back into their communities, what have you. But they told the stories, but they told the story about one particular battle that they actually saved a French town where the Germans was a stronghold. And if they could just break that, the Argonne Forest and all those things you read about was because of what the 369th did at that battle scene. They lost a lot of men, but they never retreated. The Germans just gave up and just left. And it opened the floodgates for the American army to march in and do what they had to do. So when they come back, of course, they have a parade. A lot of the guys from the South, now in New York, seeing all of this, well, why do I want to go back home? I know it's waiting for me at Cottonfield, waiting for me back there. Look at New York. But where? You just don't show up and live in New York all of a sudden. But Jim had a plan. And one of the things he did, I tell that story, that every parade that was conducted in New York, when the boats came into New York, they would assemble and march down Fifth Avenue to Union Square, passing all the people and what have you. The 369 said, we're going to march up Fifth Avenue because we're going to Harlem. We're going to end up parade in Harlem. So they marched up Fifth Avenue all the way to 110th Street, made that left turn, came to 7th Avenue, and Jim called out the song, Here Comes My Daddy Now, which was a popular song then. When he started playing that, people who didn't have any relatives in the Army just went out and just broke ranks and hugging anybody they can. And the parade lasted about 5 blocks before they had to just stop. And then Jim calls out the song, so what have you been doing? He says, I've been gone. And I don't know if that means anything to you, but anybody knows if you're in the Army, leave your sweetheart behind. But what have you been doing while I was gone? And so the song had a whole lot of meaning to it. And the colonel was so tickled he almost fell off the horse, laughing at the fact that, oh, you're talking about the women out there who are now greeting the guy. So I've been gone, what have you been doing, right? So Jim had that sense of direction, but they had a sense of humor. And when they were sailing to Europe, Jim asked my dad, you know, just think back about Spartanburg. I'm so sorry I sent you in for that newspaper. And my dad said, well, that's how we got kicked to France too. I got it 3 times. And so they always called their episode leaving here, Kicked to France, months ahead of time. And they became the first one to get there, first African-American unit to get there. So to answer your question, my dad never told me those kind of stories, but I had to hear U.B. Blake tell them, because U.B. back in the States, but he heard all the stories when they got back. So he said, you know what your dad did? Your dad fired a gun at the Germans. I said, my dad? Because everybody thought, oh, the band played in the daytime or nighttime and fought in the daytime. No, they didn't. Jim Europe was the one over there, because they were there from January 1 to Armistice in November. Jim may have been around the band for maybe 2 months on and off, because they selected a gentleman, and here's your history moment, a great piano player in New York, everybody knew. His name was Eugene Michael, Mikel. They made him the band director as a sergeant. So Michael conducted the band most of the time in France. Jim would show up at the very big Paris engagements, take the baton away, and it's Jim Europe's band, but it's Eugene doing all the hard work. But they were such great musicians, they know Jim just had to go and shoot. So Jim is out there on the line on a night parade, and he gets a touch of gas, which can kill you, disfigure you, whatever. My dad gets the word Jim is in the hospital, he got gas. You better go see him, because we don't know if he's gonna live or whatever. So my dad goes into this hospital, but all the folks have been burned by gas. They're all bandaged up and looking just like the movies. He goes around the corner, and there's Jim sitting up in the bed with a notepad, saying, "Hey sis, glad to see you. I got an idea for a song. It's called On Patrol in No Man's Land." And it became a hit over there, because he talked about what he did in No Man's Land getting gas. Send it back to UB Blake, get it copyrighted, sell those songs, right? So they always had a sense of humor to cover up the fear. So I asked, so when did you shoot something? He said, well, we were near a trench, an artillery area. And one of the American artillerymen said, hey, you want to pull this rope? He said, yes, I do. So he pulled the lanyard and boom, went off. So Dad said, oh, that's great. Then he started, where the hell is that shell going to? And they said, we don't know, but it's that way. And my dad said, okay, that's my military career right there. No more, I'm going back to singing.
Well, Mrs. Sissle, I want to say, and I know we have
10.
10. Okay, we're okay. Look, this is history, y'all. Come on. But everything you just said, and you've talked about here tonight and yesterday, this day and time, but I know you're from Florida, sanitized. This would be considered woke. DEI. What you're saying to us here tonight.
So y'all don't tell anybody what I said, okay? We had dinner and that was it.
It's going to be banned. How do we continue to tell the story? I mean, we have you, and I don't know if there's anybody else out there, but I would like to acknowledge one person. If you would stand up, Tony Jones.
Anthony. Back in 2016.
Stand up, Tony Jones. Good to see you.
No, you can sit down. It's going to take a while. Back in 2016, there was a young lady named Stephanie Neal who lives in Washington. She follows the money. What's happening now? She's a consultant. So they got the word that they were going to create a commission to get ready for the 100th anniversary of the armistice signing in 2018, November 11th. So what does America do to prepare for that celebration, 3 years from now? So Stephanie was at the meeting, and they were talking about, well, we're going to ring the bells of peace. We're going to do this. We're going to send a contingent over to France. So she raised her hand. She says, there were some African Americans in that war. And they said, yeah. Well, what are you going to do to celebrate their participation? And she started rattling off all kinds of history. He said, well, okay, give us a proposal. Come back with a proposal. That's all she needed to hear. So she thought of the idea of a band replicating the Harlem Hellfighters band, since they made all that jazz history. Okay, so she called a couple of HBCUs to see who could be a band director. And every answer she got, she said, we're all busy, especially during football season, but there's a guy in Florida who's retired, and he knows all the other band directors. So his name is Dr. Julian White. So she called Dr. White, introduces herself, mentions the Harlem Hellfighters and Jim Europe, and there was another guy with him named Noble Sissle. Julian says, oh, I know his son, he's in Tampa, we went to school together. That floored Stephanie. She said, how old is he? She said, can he walk? I mean, he should be 135 by now, right? No, he's fine, I just saw him last weekend at homecoming. Okay, so here's his number. She called me and I said, well, Stephanie, I'm glad to hear you, but Jim Europe has 5 grandchildren, 2 of them live over in Florida. I mean, we're all right here. So she found a way to bring us in as legacy. So as we went through the recruiting process of how do you do all this online, that's what they do anyway. Students send in their audition tapes with their cell phones, and they say the first 5 notes, you can see if the guy can play. So we recruited about 40 or 50 people, but we had no money to bring them anywhere, but they were all ready to go. 2 years passed, she finally gets some money, and we could now play in New York City. But they didn't believe we had a band that could play because they've never been together, so how can they play anything? But they all were remarkable musicians at their schools. So we went to the HBCUs, we got like 45 or 50 who had marched together against each other because they're all halftime show people. But they came together for this. We brought them to New York. Stephanie and I were trying to recruit. We went to a football game in Atlanta. And so we're looking for, Julian is fine, but he's not going to be, Julian is older than me. I know he's not going to be able to do all this. We're looking for someone else, So she nudged me. She said, see the guy and his wife sitting behind us? I said, tall guy? He said, yeah. He said, have you ever heard of Livingstone College? I said, yeah. He said, well, he's there. I said, and let's talk to him. When we finally got together in New York, Anthony Jones is our music director of the 369th Experience Band. Go to YouTube and you can see all kinds of concerts. But he's from here. He's native. Yep, he lives in North Carolina now, but only across the line in Charlotte. But he's a homeboy.
Yeah, he is.
So the 360 to France. Come back now. You come back here through Dr. Colby King.
Colby.
Yeah. We find Tony Jones to keep it going. So how do we continue to keep this going on?
I say this to everyone. Let's go back to the roots. Let's go back to West Africa. How do they communicate? Drum. And then when they get together, they start talking. Word of mouth. Word of mouth. Word of mouth. Spread the word. Spread the word. Word of mouth. That's how you get the word out. You're going to be resisted by every form of communications. Thank God for the internet. You can always get something up there. But you have to spread the word. And Spartanburg is so critical in that little bit of history. But you also have other history. Because there were, 100,000 troops that came through here eventually, something like that. So there's all kinds of stories. They were the first and only black group that came through here. But Spartanburg trained quite a few who went and died in World War I, and you should recognize that. But a person like Henry Johnson, who came back in Harlem and was celebrated, but had to go back to his job as a porter at a railroad station in Albany. But when the word got out who he was, he went on a speaking tour. That's how he made a living, until the day he decided to tell the true story of how he was treated here and over there when he got back. And his speaking engagement just fell off. And he died, they say in the streets, but not in the streets, but he died a pauper and was forgotten about. Until Bill Clinton, this man had been wounded 6 times in this one battle. Bill Clinton at least awarded him a Purple Heart and a medal of something. It wasn't until Obama gave him the Congressional Medal of Honor. And so Henry Johnson came out of that whole thing 80 years after he died, a hero.
And his daughter, who was here, because at that time she said that she, like so many others, she hated Spartanburg. And when we actually had the unveiling, we had the grandkids of Mayor Floyd. It was a Floyd funeral home here. His grandkids and Mr. Johnson's granddaughter, Tara, and Fanny Rachiski, who was a Negro spiritualist from Alabama, who I met in Switzerland. She came in and she sung the song, "Oh My Lord, What a Morning." And at that unveiling was the night that Tara said everything just washed off of her as she looked at the Floyd family, and they embraced at that point. And it was like, I can't believe it, because she's like, Spartanburg was the last thing I wanted to come back to. And it was after that, it was like that whole Negro spiritual, it was like, it's something about the music.
Something about the music.
Music is everything, and everything is music.
It always has been. And Jim Europe, he became the master organizer. When he came to New York in 06, 07, he brought his violin thinking he could make a living with the violin in New York City. He said, "Well, I'll switch to the piano, but at least I can play, you know, in some juke joint somewhere, at least make a living." When he got there, William Marion Cook was the dean of everything. This man already had his symphony orchestra. He had written all kinds of masterpieces. Jim York comes to town, and there's a little conflict. He says, "This is a new guy. I've been here all the time." But Jim York organized people and took on May 2nd, I think, 1912, 200 musicians into Carnegie Hall for an all-black music concert, which was unheard of. They say Paul Whiteman was the first jazz played in Carnegie Hall in 1920-something. No, it happened in 12. But it was a one-night affair, and it broke all kinds of records. But it set Jim York on the path that he's the man, and Marion Cook had to recognize that. So to do that, when they played a Will Marion Cook song, Jim York, Cook is in the orchestra pit playing a bassoon or something. He handed him the baton and said, "This is your song, you can conduct it." And that made everything fine then, for a moment, but that made everything fine. No more hostility to who's the best, who's here first or second. But Jim York from that point on became the man because of what he accomplished, not as a writer-composer, but what he had done as an organizer.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and I want to thank SIREN for bringing you here. And I want to do what I'm supposed to do with SIREN, and that's to close this off before both of us get kicked
Yeah.
out.
And I got some wine warming up over there. Yeah.
So, folks, could y'all give Noble Sissle a round of applause? They got a timer on this thing. Tony? I know you got
Wait for the green light, wait for the green light.
Look, I know you got a timer on it. Anyway, before going to the seat, this is another token. You know, you like those word tokens.
Subway, that's where you tokens at.
And this is from James and James. Were you here? One of our local black business. Yes, sir.
Stand up, James.
Most beautiful
There's
couple. You're the hog help out right down there. Thank you, baby. Beautiful couple.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, James.
You can have your mic back now.